Good morning, Terry. How you doing, buddy?
Today, I want to talk about the effect of caffeine on the voice. Will it dehydrate you? Should you avoid it? Or is all of that just a myth?
So most singers have heard this idea of you need to avoid caffeine if you're a singer. Caffeine's bad for your voice, it'll dehydrate you. I've been told this many times since my first singing teacher, since I started singing, 15 years ago. And I've just been scouring the internet for, top 10 best things for your voice or top 5 foods to avoid for your vocal health. And caffeine seems to appear in basically all of them. So this idea is ubiquitous. But what I don't see is much evidence or justification for making that suggestion. It just seems like this is something that people believe. So I want to talk about the research today, what we actually know of the effect caffeine has on the voice, and should you avoid it or can you use it? First and foremost, caffeine will not dehydrate you. This is one myth that seems ubiquitous, and I kind of wish it would just go away. All drinks, except alcoholic drinks, contribute to your daily fluid or your daily water intake, and caffeine-containing drinks are no different. Now, there is some evidence that caffeine is a mild diuretic. It'll make you go to the toilet more. But there's very little evidence that it has any impact on overall hydration status. Now, recent evidence points out that very high amounts of caffeine can indeed induce an acute diuretic effect. And this is an amount of about 6 milligrams per kilo of body weight. However, that amount of caffeine is really, really high. So for example, for an average sort of 70 kilo person, that would equal about 480 milligrams of caffeine, which is the equivalent of about 5 shots of quite strong espresso. So the same study revealed that more moderate amounts of caffeine, so about 3 milligrams per kilo, or about 2 shots of espresso, really had no diuretic effect on individuals. Now, it's important to recognize that diuretic effect does not mean dehydration. The body has a very, very complex homeostatic mechanism for regulating body fluid. So even if caffeine does make you go to the bathroom a little bit more, that fluid will likely be compensated for somewhere else. Also, if you're particularly worried about drinking a bit of caffeine and it dehydrating you, you can always just have it with a little bit of extra water on the side. Now, this study found that replacing 4 daily cups of water had absolutely no impact on hematological and urinary markers of hydration status, which is consistent with a major review that concluded that there is no support for the suggestion that consumption of caffeine-containing beverages as part of a normal lifestyle leads to fluid loss in excess of the volume ingested or is associated with poor hydration status. So, please help me in my quest to destroy this myth. Regardless of what your first singing teacher told you, caffeine will not dehydrate you. Now, for full disclosure and balance, there is one study that did show a little bit of an effect of caffeine on the voice specifically. So this study tested the effect of 250 milligrams of caffeine, which is about the amount you'd find in a strong double espresso or maybe 2 cups of instant coffee. Now, they tested the effect of this on normal speaking voice, reading a passage of text, and singing Happy Birthday. And the study did find that in some subjects, caffeine produced alterations in voice quality. However, it should be noted that this study used a sample size of 8 people, so it's quite limited in that regard. Other more robust studies have painted a very different picture. This study is showing that more conservative doses of caffeine, about 100 milligrams or so, did not adversely affect vocal phonation or have an impact on vocal acoustics and aerodynamics. Now, this is consistent with one very, very robust study that tested the effect of 200 milligrams of caffeine on 48 females aged between 18 and 35. It was found caffeine did not degrade vocal acoustics and aerodynamics in any way. And in fact, this has even been seen in studies that have tested higher doses of caffeine. So this study here tested much higher doses, about 480 milligrams, on 16 subjects, and tested the difference between a high dose of caffeine and essentially a placebo, which contained 24 milligrams of caffeine. And it was found there was no significant differences in voice measures between the caffeine group, the 480 milligrams group, or the control group, the 24 milligrams group. So it seems that caffeine won't dehydrate you and has no direct impact on vocal functioning. But are there reasons that you might want to avoid caffeine? Well, if you suffer from particularly significant anxiety or performance nerves, I think you're probably best off staying away from it, because you don't necessarily need that extra central nervous system stimulation, because it may actually have the impact of exacerbating those feelings of intense nerves or anxiety. And I actually notice this with myself when I'm performing. If it's a particularly significant audition or a big opening night, I'm already bouncing off the walls with excitement and anxiety and nerves and adrenaline, and I just don't need that extra stimulation. However, if it's show 12 of a 20-show run and a Tuesday night, and I'm not really particularly feeling it, I think caffeine can really be very useful in that situation to give you a little burst of energy. Also, I wouldn't recommend increasing your usual dose before you have to sing. So if you're used to getting a double shot flat white on the way to rehearsals, don't suddenly change it to a triple shot flat white on the way to a performance, because that might have a negative effect on how you react to it.
So, there is ample evidence that shows that caffeine can help with sort of longer duration, steady state endurance activities. So if you're doing something like a 10K run or something like a half marathon or a marathon, caffeine can actually increase performance. So I like to do this sort of weird steppy ladder. I actually don't know what that's called, but I love it. I'm getting a little older and my joints are getting a little crackly. And I find that's a fantastic piece of kit. But caffeine can help in performance of that kind of activity by as much as 7 or 8%. So that's worth taking into account.
So why did I bring that up? Well, if you're like me or a lot of the performers that I know and am friends with, you might relate to the idea of a performance feeling a bit like an endurance event. If you add in things like costume time and makeup and warming up and all of that, a performance, particularly an opera, like one that I would normally do, can last 3, 4, 5 hours. In fact, the last show that I was involved in before quarantine was a production of an opera called Agrippina at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. And on the shows that went up at 8 p.m, we were leaving the theatre at about midnight. It's a really, really long event. So in those situations, a little bit of caffeine, that 7 to 8% performance benefit may really help you get through a long night of a performance. Now, of course, I'm not telling you you have to be taking caffeine or you should be drinking coffee before performances. Of course, it's a matter of personal preference. But if you do enjoy caffeine or you even find there may be some benefit in drinking caffeine, the evidence suggests that there's no real reason that you should definitely be avoiding it simply because you're a singer. It won't dehydrate you and it won't affect your vocal mechanism, regardless of what your first singing teacher told you or regardless of what you may have been hearing for many, many years. That's all for now. Feed the life you want to lead. Bye.